Okay, yeah, so thanks for having me here today. I have to just quickly start by apologising to any of you that listened to any of my talks at the kind of later half of last year. This is going to be quite a lot of repetition. When you work with invertebrates, not a lot of things often tend to change over the winter months, so I do have to apologise, so just bear with me. But yeah, so I'm Caitlin, and I'm here today to talk about Species on the Edge. I work for BugLife, and I'm obviously the Species on the Edge Conservation Officer. So I'm one of two that work for BugLife, and my counterpart Sally is based on the west coast of Scotland. So for those of you that don't know, BugLife is a UK-wide charity that was first set up in the year 2000 under the name the Invertebrate Conservation Trust. And at the moment, we are the only organisation in the whole of Europe that's concerned with the conservation of all invertebrates. So this could be anything from bees to beetles, jumping spiders to jellyfish, worms to woodlice, you name it. Any animal without a backbone, we look to conserve. So BugLife's main aim as an organisation generally is to halt invertebrate extinctions and hopefully achieve sustainable populations of invertebrates around the UK. We're quite a small team. There's, I think, just short of 50 of us around the UK, so we work very hard together to do this through things like inspiring others, helping to shape policy, practical conservation work, and just generally raising awareness. So before I get on to Species on the Edge, I just wanted to quickly talk about something, why invertebrates are important and why we should care about them. Something I think that is being talked about more frequently nowadays is this kind of silent extinction, or as Dave Goulston puts it, the unnoticed apocalypse that invertebrates are facing. So for a lot of us, not in this room, but a lot of people, invertebrates are generally associated with being more of a nuisance. People think of bugs and they think of, bites, stings, spreading disease. And for many people, they're also quite a serious source of fear, especially when you start talking about spiders. A lot of people get creeped out. So I know that this isn't the kind of room that I would say, oh, no, I know not all of us think like that, but it is something that I think is really important, that kind of global perspective on bugs starts to change and we start to see them in a more positive light, and that we start to value them, not just for how important they are, but also for how interesting, beautiful and diverse they are as well. So nearly 3/4 of the types of crops that humans grow rely on insect pollination. And not only this, but they provide a whole range of other ecosystem services that are important for the day-to-day functioning of the planet. So things like nutrient decomposition, nutrient cycling, pest control, and food for other species, just to name a few. So when you look at the bigger picture, there are only really a small number of species that have the capacity to cope with the environmental changes that we are putting on our planet. And these species are generally very mobile, unfussy species that are quite tolerant to things like pollutants and other environmental changes. So over time, the result of these changes would kind of be seen as these few generalist species replacing the rich diversity of species that make up our life on planet Earth as we know it. So it is becoming more obvious that the ecological balance of our planet is becoming, I would say, wobbly, is putting it quite lightly. So there is a pressing need for things to change. Excuse me. Insects alone make up to 50% of all species on planet Earth, and they also make up to 90% of all animal species. So that's not invertebrates, that's just insects, which is why these losses are so concerning, because the health of our planet really does depend on them. Ooh. There we go. So insects and other invertebrates face a very complex storm of problems that threaten their survival. To list, just a few, we have things like unpredictable and extreme weather, often as a result of climate change, which is something I think that we've seen more and more around the country this past winter. You also have things like intensive farming practices and the development of land, which can often cause the loss, damage and fragmentation of important habitats, things like flower-rich habitats, but it also isolates and negatively impacts the quality of those that remain. We also have things like the use of pesticides, other pollutants, invasive species, the loss of our kind of important countryside habitats to the greening or cleaning up of the countryside for the humans that live there rather than the wildlife, as well as deforestation, but also inappropriate afforestation. And another thing that I think is being mentioned more in the news now is the loss and damage of our brownfield sites. So I've said this in a lot of presentations, and I often say this to school kids, is imagine living in a desert with hardly any food, water or shelter. That kind of really is what a lot of the modern British countryside is like nowadays, not just for pollinators or invertebrates, but for wildlife as a whole. So the motto of Bug Life is saving the small things that run the planet, but the kind of sad reality is that we're starting to lose them. So, as I said, Bug Life believe there should be sustainable populations of all invertebrates in the UK. So, no insect extinction is our response to this current crisis. And to do this, we have three kind of main aims that we need to achieve. The first is that we need to make space for wildlife and reconnect the wild parts of our landscapes, creating rooms for insects to thrive. The second being that we need to free our land and freshwaters from pollutants and invasive species, creating safe spaces for insects. And the third, which is something I go on about all the time, is just friendly relationships with insects. And this campaign also includes invertebrates as a whole. So we really need to act now to stop these declines, but the quality and impact of that action is still kind of affected by our lack of understanding and awareness. So no insect extinction is kind of a call to action. It's a coming together of people and organisations with this kind of shared endeavour to heal our planet's life support systems. And I think that this is something that does align with a lot of the kind of underlying messages of Species on the Edge. So Species on the Edge itself is huge. If I was to try and break it down, we'd be here for about 5 days. It's a very ambitious programme for species recovery in Scotland that aims to take action over 37 declining and threatened species that are found across Scotland's coasts and islands. The programme itself is led by Nature Scot, along with members of the Rethink Nature Partnership that you can see here, and the programme is primarily funded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund. So the programme itself is working across 7 landscape areas, with each area having its own team. And the teams consist of staff members from all 8 organisations who are working together to deliver 9 species recovery plans. And each of the species recovery plans has several species within them. So we're kind of taking this multi-taxa approach to conservation, and that's being echoed in the delivery of the project itself, where we have staff members from various organisations helping deliver the projects for other organisations. So for example, in my area, I work quite closely with butterfly conservation, and in the West Coast, there is Bug Life staff that are working really closely with, for example, Plant Life, ARC and Bumblebee Conservation Trust. And as I mentioned, the project is funded by NLHF, amongst a number of others that you can see here. The project itself is quite new. The ball kind of got rolling with it early last year, and it's coming to an end in late 2026. So this infographic doesn't show it as well. The circles are quite small, but as you would guess, I'm part of the East Coast team, and there are 2 of us in the East Coast team. So my colleague Tracy is based more kind of up by Inverness, Moray Firth, Dornoch area. And my area of the coast stretches from kind of Cove, so just south of the city, down to Montefieth, which is just north of Dundee. And in my area, I'm involved in 2 of the 9 species project plans, both of which are invertebrate focused. So the first of those 2 plans is Invertebrates on the Edge, which is obviously led by Bug Life and focuses on 5 species you can see here. So on the top left, we have the tadpole shrimp. The top right, we have the plantain leaf beetle. And then along the bottom, from left to right, we have the short-necked oil beetle, medicinal leech, and border brown lacewing. So Invertebrates on the Edge is kind of aiming to kickstart species recovery, which we're hoping to do through things like practical conservation interventions, surveying, monitoring, and just generally learning more about the ecology of these species. And this work will be really, really important, not just for halting the decline of some of these species, but potentially for stopping them going extinct, not just in Scotland, but in the UK. And we're also hoping that this work will benefit a range of other species, 2 of which being the northern brown argus and small blue butterflies. But here in the East Coast, I'm only working with one of these species, which is the border brown lacewing. So the border brown lacewing is one of the brown lacewings, or the Hemerabidae, and it is currently the only megaloma species that's been recorded in the UK. We think it occurs at quite a low abundance. Given how long you can spend surveying for this species, it's very small compared to how few you can find. And in the UK, this species is thought to be associated with wood sage, so the plant wood sage, and the aphids and other small invertebrates that can be found on the wood sage. The only problem with that is that wood sage goes everywhere, and this species has only been recorded on wood sage that's growing in kind of rocky and exposed slopes and undercliffs. So it is in species in the edge, but it has been found inland as well. It is possible, however, that this species might not solely be confined to wood sage, so it could also be found on other vegetation in a similar habitat. For example, in Europe, it's been recorded from hazels, and if I'm right in saying some of the very, very old records in Scotland, it has been found on thyme, but we just don't know. And the species is thought to fly from around late May to August, but obviously, as with other invertebrates, there can be variations in the flight season depending on things like local climate, as well as annual variations depending on things like weather conditions and that kind of thing. And during the day, this little bug can generally be found kind of deep in amongst the vegetation, and is quite unwilling to move even when disturbed. It can be known for faking death, but that doesn't stop it from flying off if you were to catch it. So this species was included as one of the kind of priority species for the programme because we think it is quite a rare species. Prior to some 2019 surveys done by BugLife, it was only known to exist at 4 sites in the whole of the UK, 2 of which being in Edinburgh, so those are at Holyrood Park and Blackford Hill, and the other 2 are in Aberdeenshire, so we've got St Cyrus and Dooney Point, which is at Muckles. And I want to add that just before these 2019 surveys, there was a record at Dooney Point in 2018, thanks to Nick Littlewood, which was the first of its kind in nearly 100 years. But on the other side from that, Blackford Hill in Edinburgh has a lot of historic records, as well as a lot of specimens that have come from the site. But following surveys in 2015, 18 and 19, the species hasn't been found there for quite some time. So not a lot is also known about just the ecology and the life cycle of this species. So literature, not just on this species, but on Hemerabidae and lacewings in general, is pretty dusty. There's not a lot that you can find. I think people say like the keys for these species are really, really old. There aren't any updated keys for ID of larvae and things like that. So as a result of what we think is a very restricted distribution in Scotland, this species is also included on the Scottish biodiversity list. So when you combine this kind of lack of knowledge along with what we think is a very restricted distribution, it makes this species potentially very, very vulnerable to extinction. So we're trying to push to locate new potential sites for the species and learn more about it so we can prevent its extinction in the UK. So this is a very brief summary of our results from 2023. It's not that there's like none of them left. There were a bunch of records that came in from Edinburgh that I got sent by one of the park rangers a couple of weeks ago, so I haven't had the chance to put them in. But we got 3 records last year, and again, I have to thank Nick for all 3 of those records. I was just lucky enough to be with him for one of those. But as you can see, we found 3. One of those at the bottom is at Craigavon Bay, and the one above that is around Skatey Shore. So they're both beside Stonehaven Golf Course at Garran Point. And the one above that is, I think, at Dooney Point in Muckles as well. So hopefully next year we'll find more when we get more of us looking for them. There was really only a small team of a few of us looking for them this past summer, so I think we did quite well, and by we I mean Nick. So when it comes to actually surveying for the species, generally speaking during the daytime, we're using sweep nets and beating trays through the vegetation. But lacewings and their allies are also known for coming to light traps. Usually thought of along with caddisflies as bycatch. So as somebody who really likes moths and really enjoys trapping, I think that's something I'm going to try and incorporate into my surveying this coming year, using various different kinds of moth traps at different sites to see if we have any success in finding them. And I recently read some literature on not just the border brown lacewing, but Hemerabidae, and there are suggestions that they could be largely crepuscular. So I'm also planning on making kind of pop-up washed baskets with UV LEDs, pinning them down in the cliffs and kind of sitting out with them at different hours through the night and into the early morning to see if that works. I'm kind of regretting putting myself in for that, but I'm not a late night person. and patience. So at this point in time, it's more about trying to locate, where are they and can we find them at all along the stretch of the coast. This is a picture up there of my other half, Joseph. He spent the entire summer helping me look for this species and has yet to see one with his own eyes. So it takes a lot of time. So the second of my two project plans is Rocking the Blues, which is led by Butterfly Conservation. So over the last couple of years into decades, BC Scotland volunteers have been collecting data on both of these species, and unfortunately, the data has shown significant declines for both species in their distribution and population sizes. So it focuses on the northern brown argus and the small blue, which are obviously two of Scotland's most threatened species of butterfly. So Scotland's coastal grasslands, vegetated shingles, dunes and undercliffs obviously provide a rich diversity of habitats for Lepidoptera in general. And a key aspect of these species' ability to thrive is the availability of kind of suitable quality habitat, both locally and at a landscape scale, and the connectivity of this habitat. So it's been decided that large areas of the east, north and Solway coasts have been decided to be vitally important for these species. I would go into the survey results for these species as well, but we just don't have enough time. But my area is kind of split in two with these two butterflies, with the northern brown argus colonies being found St. Cyrus North and the small blue colonies being found St. Cyrus South. So there's quite a split in the two. So obviously the project itself is kind of just getting off the ground. So we've got lots and lots of big aims, but in my area, we're kind of generally hoping to survey and monitor both the species and the habitat to then also undertake habitat creation and improvement works. We'll also be working with landowners and land managers, so letting them know how best to manage their own pieces of land, not just to best help the species, but to also boost biodiversity on site. I've also been working with species champions and ambassador schools. So we have a couple of species champions, and currently we have one ambassador school for the small blue and Crunusti. So I went out with the P7s last year, later in the year, and we were planting kidney vetch plug plants and sowing seeds with them, which was fantastic. They're a really, really keen bunch. And we're also hoping to train local community volunteers to survey and monitor, and to hopefully also carry out their own habitat management, so that they can then provide valuable data on the species status beyond the timescale of the project. And that also means that once this project comes to an end in 2026, local communities can care for these species well into the future. So over the next few years, basically, I'm just trying to get as much surveying, monitoring and habitat work done as I can, alongside working really hard to raise awareness for these species along my stretch of the coast, and getting more community groups and more local people involved, and establishing this kind of network of people who understand and know about the species and can survey for the species so that they can monitor them, and to also help just potentially give these species a bigger stage to help stop their declines. So coming into 2024, as we come into kind of spring and the start of summer, I'm hoping to organise a couple of training days for all three species, as well as organising kind of survey parties and just generally increasing the survey efforts, so that we can try and learn more about these species along the Aberdeenshire and Angus coasts, and hopefully as well discover new populations. So I'm hoping, I keep saying this to everybody, but I'm hoping to put together this like Avengers-style team of people who have various different interests, because a lot of the sites that these species are found, biodiversity is not very well recorded. And it's not exactly the kind of place you can try and organise a BioBlitz for wee kids to go, because they're quite tricky and not very safe to get to. So I thought it would be really beneficial if we could get various groups of people who are into, it doesn't matter, birds, botany, different kinds of invertebrates as well, because obviously I do work for Bug Life and I do a lot of work with lacewings, butterflies and moths, but that's kind of where I'm okay with grasshoppers, but that's kind of where my expertise ends. And so we're hoping to also work with communities and volunteers. We're doing a lot of push for general engagement work. I was in Dundee building a bug hotel a couple of weeks ago with an addiction recovery group in a men's open prison. So in the middle of Dundee, and we're hopefully going to try and kind of improve their garden space for urban pollinators, because it's kind of just grass and nothing else. Another thing we have is we're hopefully going to rebuild the small blue transecting crenusty. For those of you that don't know, the small blue transecting crenusty that's beside Barry Budden was lost over the winter due to storm damage, so that's completely gone. So I'm hopefully planning to work with the sustainability team at the golf course, the council and potentially our ambassador school to see how we can kind of rebuild the area. We did manage to get a look over the fence in Barry Budden, and thanks to their very heavy coastal defences, the kidney vetch on the other side of the fence is fine. So we're hoping that the colonies of small blue in Barry Budden have survived. And generally, we're just hoping to raise awareness, as I keep saying, and changing public perspective on invertebrates. You know, when you work events, I work events, and you have a stall, and wee kids come running up to the stall, and you know they like bugs. The parents, they kind of look at you like, oh, you know, they see bug life and they want to walk away. So I think that's something we're really trying to work on and improve how people view bugs in general. So yeah, if you want to get involved, drop me an email. As I said, I'm going to be running some training courses kind of in the coming months, and would be really looking for people who have various interests in surveying, learning how to survey. And I was speaking to Mark Tasker earlier as well. Anybody who would be keen in getting involved together or separately and doing some moth trapping at some of the sites, it would be great to get in touch. And keep an eye out on the Species on the Edge, Bug Life in BC social media pages for any other kind of online events and talks. And yeah, just send in your casual records if you think you found any of our host food plants or any of the species, and you can sign up to the mailing list with this QR code. Yeah, thanks for listening. Does anybody have any questions? Bless you.
Is it coming through? Yeah, coming through now. So out the warm up. I have the microphone if anyone's got questions. Please put up your hand for Caitlin. Mike.